Hello, children. This is Peregrine Royce Shufflebottom, your host for the program Introduction to Musical Instruments. Our story today is about a fine young farmer with a musical dream. Is everybody comfortable? Good. Then let's begin. Once upon a time, there was a farmer named Ludwig von Vegetable.
Hello, I'm Ludwig von Vegetable, and it's very nice to meet you.
Ludwig was a good farmer. Every morning at the break of day, Ludwig was up and at his many farm chores. The first thing was to feed the barnyard animals and milk the cows.
Good morning, everyone. Did you all have sweet dreams? Good. Good morning, Perry. Well, you got me up right on time as usual. Here's some corn for you and your family. Claudia, Francesca, Maria, good morning.
While the Cacciatore family was clucking away over their breakfast, Ludwig went to see the pigs.
Morning, pigs. Here's your breakfast. Well, your pigsty is nice and clean as usual. All right, everybody. I've got to get going now. I've got to weed the celery field and cultivate the corn. I'll see you all at sundown, as usual.
Ludwig was a good farmer, and he worked hard every day to see that his vegetables and animals were well cared for. He liked his farm life well enough. But Ludwig had a dream. Ludwig's first love was music, but not just any music. Ludwig loved the music of the orchestra. Even as a child, Ludwig sat in front of the radio, conducting the music and laughing and singing along. Ludwig's greatest dream was that one day he would go to the big city and conduct a fine orchestra in one of the world's great orchestral pieces.
If only I could conduct an orchestra, my life would be happy and fine. If only the flutes, the horns, the violins could someday, could somehow be mine. I dream that I'll conduct an orchestra in some famous symphony hall. And people will come from far and wide to hear, and my picture will hang on the wall. I'll be known the whole world over, the greatest conductor ever born. They'll call me the Maestro von Vegetable, and never again will I pick corn. If only I could conduct an orchestra to hear my great orchestra play. It's nice to think that it might happen, but it doesn't look like it will happen today. I suppose that I'll never have the luck to conduct an orchestra. Oh, it certainly would be fine to conduct an orchestra. Oh, goodness, sunset already? I've got to get back to the barnyard. All the animals will be waiting for me.
Ludwig put his tractor into high gear and made it back to the barnyard just as the sun was setting like a big red musical note on the horizon. And just as he expected, all the animals had gathered and were sitting, patiently waiting. But things didn't look quite normal, for the animals had picked up all sorts of empty jugs, rakes, pots and pans, old pipes to blow through, anything they could find that made some sort of musical sound, and now they were quietly watching Ludwig as he walked closer. Ludwig smiled at them. And then he turned around and bowed as if he were in a great symphony hall. He stepped up on a bale of hay and took an old corn cob from a pocket in his overalls. He began to wave the corn cob like an orchestra conductor's baton, and all the animals began to play. Ludwig conducted them just as if they were a real orchestra. He waved his baton and the orchestra played right in time. He waved it in bigger movements and they played louder. He made the movements of his baton smaller and they played softer. And as the end of the Barnyard Symphony came closer, Ludwig waved his baton faster and wider, and the animals played faster and louder until he made a great swish with his baton, and the music stopped with a fine crash.
Oh, my goodness. That was the best we've ever played.
Yes, Ludwig and his friends were a Barnyard Symphony Orchestra. They didn't have real instruments to play, but the animals loved music just as much as Ludwig did, and so they did the best they could with the instruments they could make up.
You all just played wonderfully tonight. I think we are getting better with each passing day.
Ludwig gave them their supper, milked the cows, and wished them all pleasant dreams. Back at his farmhouse, Ludwig just couldn't get the music they had been playing out of his head.
Oh boy, that was great. Gee, a real orchestra could play that so well.
So all through that night, Ludwig sat at his desk, humming and writing down his Barnyard Symphony. By the time morning came, Ludwig had finished. He was tired, but very happy.
I'm a composer,
Ludwig cried, and he was. He had written a piece of music. That evening, worn out from chasing rabbits out of the cabbage patch, Ludwig sat milking the cows and humming his symphony. All of a sudden, there was a blinding light and a burst of hay.
Holy cow! Who are you? And where did you come from?
Before him stood the most unusual cow he had ever seen.
Hello, Ludwig. I'm Helga Holstein, your fairy god cow. Fairy what? God cow. Maybe you expected a fairy god pig? Oh, well, it's very nice to meet you. The pleasure is mine, I'm sure. I have been watching you all these years. From afar, of course. You are a very good farmer. You know your cows speak highly of you. Well, they're very good musicians, you know. I know. That's why I'm here. I heard your music last night. It was very good. Well, thank you. Do you know a lot about orchestra music? No, but I know what I like. It was very catchy. Why, that was very good. You have a lovely voice and a very good ear. Thank you, Ludwig. Now, let's get down to business. I am here to make your dream come true. You are going to have your very own orchestra. Really? Why, that's wonderful. Thank you, Helga. You're really very kind. Good. Now, what I want to know is this. Just exactly what do you need for your orchestra? What do I need? This is all so sudden. Well, let's see. The instruments of the orchestra. Well, first of all, I'll need a section of stringed instruments. String? You don't need me to get you a bunch of string. No, Helga, I don't mean like kite string. These instruments use a very special kind of string. What's that small one over there? I think it's cute. Well, that's the violin. It's probably the most important instrument in the orchestra because it plays most of the melodies. There are 30 violins in an orchestra, and together they sound wonderful. Ach, that is beautiful, Ludwig. What's the next instrument in the string section? Next come the violas. They have a middle range sound, a lot like the sound of the violin, only lower and heavier. Next comes my favorite, the cello. Even though it's shaped like a violin and a viola, it's too big to play under your chin. You sit in a chair with the cello between your legs, and when you draw the bow across the strings, a most beautiful velvety sound comes out. The biggest member of the string section is the double bass, which we usually just call the bass. It's even too big to play sitting on a chair. It's played either standing up or sitting on a high stool. Its sound is deep, low, and gruff. Oh, that sounds like my husband, Heinrich. When all the stringed instruments play together, you are hearing the string section of the orchestra. In fact, some composers like the string section so much that they write entire pieces of music only for the strings. That's a nice warm sound. Ludwig, this string section is all you need. Oh no, Helga. The music I hear in my head uses all the sections of the orchestra. For instance, I could never get along without the woodwind section. Don't tell me they are made out of wood. Yup, they sure are. But they don't have strings. Just like their name suggests, you need wind to make a sound with woodwinds. It's a funny thing. The first woodwind instrument I was thinking about was the flute. And it's not even made of wood anymore. Ludwig, you're going to confuse me. I'm sorry, Helga, but that's the way it is. The flute is called a woodwind because all flutes used to be made out of wood. Now they're mostly made out of metal, but the thing that has stayed the same is their high, pure sound. Flutes sound to me like birds singing to one another on a sunny day. Now we can get to the woodwinds that are made out of wood. Good idea. What's next? Well, let's listen to the oboe and the bassoon. What a piercing sound. Sounds like a bunch of ducks. But they can sound gruff, too. Add the clarinet, and you have the woodwind section. The clarinet certainly has a smoother sound. You know, with the different sections of the orchestra, you can play lots of different kinds of music. That's right, Helga. Now you're beginning to see what's so very interesting about an orchestra. And we've only looked at 2 of the sections. What about the brass section? What about the brass section? Just listen. Oh boy, I like that. It really makes you stand up straight. I knew you'd like that one. It's a trumpet. The brass family has a real variety of sounds. How about this one? That's a trombone. It's a big metal tube twisted in 2 big curves. You change the sound by sliding this part of the tube in and out. It sure sounds different than the trumpet. Are you sure these brass instruments are all in the same family? Yup. If you think they sound different, listen to the French horn. Oh, I like that. It's very dreamy. I had no idea that brass instruments could make so many different sounds. And we're not even done yet. Here's the tuba. That sounds like distant thunder. Oh, my Aunt Elsie. Your Aunt Elsie must have quite a voice. She does, she does. When we were little, she would call to us all the way from the next farm. When are you coming to visit your Aunt Elsie? I'll bet Aunt Elsie would like the sound of the brass section. And when you add it to the strings and woodwinds, you really start to have an orchestral sound. That is really quite a list of instruments. I'd better get to work. Sorry, Helga, but we're not through yet. You thought the tuba sounded like distant thunder. Wait until you hear the percussion section. Holy cow! What? Never mind. What is all that? That's the percussion section. Percussion instruments are any instruments that get their sound by being hit. They are timpani, snare drum, bass drum, cymbals, chimes, xylophone, anything you can hit with a stick, mallet, or even your hands. I think I've got the idea. Is there anything else? Phew, that was something, wasn't it? The only instruments left that I'll need are the harp and the piano. The harp and the piano can play lots of notes at once. They're like little orchestras all by themselves. Are you sure you need them after all this other stuff? Well, I suppose I can get along without them. They aren't always used with an orchestra, but as long as I'm getting my dream come true, I figure why not go for the whole kit and caboodle? Good point. I'll tell you, Ludwig, I didn't know there were that many instruments in the orchestra. I've really got my work cut out for me. But you want an orchestra? And an orchestra you shall have. Bye!
And with that, Helga disappeared in a blinding light and a burst of hay. Ludwig could hardly sleep that night, and all through the next day he whistled his symphony and happily did his work.
My orchestra, oh boy. Whew. I hate having to arrive like that. Hay always makes me sneeze. Achoo! Helga, it's wonderful to see you. Hasn't it been a wonderful day? I've been feeling just wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, Ludwig. Sit down, my friend. We have to talk. I don't want to talk. I want to play. Ludwig, please. You're not making this any easier. I don't have your orchestra. What? There's no truck out in the barnyard? No truck, Ludwig. I spent all day running around to music stores, and let me tell you, an orchestra costs a fortune. The National Fairy Godcow Association only gives you so many wishes to grant every year. To get you an orchestra would use up my quota for the next 100 years. All Farmer Joe next door has asked for is a new roof for his barn. If I use up all my wishes on you, what will I tell him? Boy, my hooves are killing me. No orchestra? No glistening harp? No pounding timpani? Oh, I had so hoped. I know, Ludwig, I know. Is there anything else you'd like? A nice solid gold carrot peeler? No, thanks. I've really got just about everything I need. You go take care of Farmer Joe. He's got some bad leaks in that barn. Good luck to you, Ludwig, and hold on to your dream. You never know how you might get to conduct that orchestra. Well, I guess it's back to work.
And that's just what Ludwig did. Ludwig had a dream, but after all, he was a good farmer, and his animals and vegetables needed his care. That evening, Ludwig and his barnyard orchestra played a rather sad little piece of music. They were just finishing up when Horatio, Farmer Joe's horse, came galloping into the barnyard.
Oh, Ludwig, come quickly. Farmer Joe needs your help. Helga has been hurt.
Ludwig dropped his corncob conductor's baton and ran over to Farmer Joe's. There was Helga lying on the ground.
Helga! Hello, Ludwig. I seem to have had an accident. We were up on the barn, fixing the roof, and Helga fell off. I told her not to go up there. It's dangerous.
Ludwig didn't waste a moment. He and Farmer Joe loaded Helga into some soft hay in the back of Farmer Joe's truck.
I'll drive Helga right over to the vet's. He'll know what to do.
Ludwig arrived at the veterinarian's in no time, but the doctor wasn't home. There was a sign on the door.
Gone to New York City for a concert at Carnegie Hall, back at 10 o'clock. Carnegie Hall? I know where that is. Helga, New York City is no place for you. You get comfortable in the doctor's barn, and I'll go get him. Thank you, Ludwig. You go ahead. I'll be all right.
Ludwig got in the truck and rushed to New York City. He knew right where Carnegie Hall was because that was one of the world's greatest symphony halls, and he had heard many orchestra concerts on the radio that had come from there. When Ludwig arrived at Carnegie Hall, the concert was about to begin, and all the people were inside. Ludwig explained his problem to the ticket taker.
Don't worry, Ludwig. We'll find the doctor before the concert begins. I know just how you feel. My pet cat had a cold, and I had to get her to the vet right away.
While Ludwig waited, he looked around at this most famous concert hall. The orchestra was tuning up inside, but he hardly heard, so great was his concern for his friend Helga. He looked up, and he couldn't believe what he saw.
World premiere, the Barnyard Symphony in C major by Ludwig von Vegetable? I don't understand.
Ludwig ran back to the stage door and demanded to see the conductor.
I don't care if he is ready to begin the concert. I must see him now. I am Ludwig von Vegetable.
The conductor was summoned immediately.
How could you be playing my symphony today?
The conductor confessed that he didn't know where the music had come from. It was mailed to me in a plain brown envelope. I played it through, and it was so good that I had to have the orchestra play it at my concert.
I wrote that music.
The conductor knew that no one but he and his orchestra had heard the music. Suspiciously, he asked Ludwig to hum a few bars.
Well, that's easy. Do 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 do.
Oh, joy! Oh, rapture! You are the composer of this exquisite symphony. You must do us the honor of conducting your music for us tonight. The conductor raced off to the stage while Ludwig stood there in a daze. Ludwig heard the conductor announce that the composer of the Barnyard Symphony was in Carnegie Hall at this very moment, and an eager murmur went through the audience. Then it was very quiet. Ludwig walked toward the stage while the conductor stood waiting. In his hand was a sparkling white baton, which he handed to Ludwig. Ludwig swallowed hard and walked out onto the stage. There in front of him was an audience of eagerly waiting orchestra music lovers. Ludwig turned around and saw 100 symphony orchestra musicians. They were dressed in fancy black tuxedos and long black gowns, and their beautiful instruments shone in the lights from high above. They smiled at Ludwig, waiting. Ludwig stepped up onto the conductor's podium and, feeling quite sure of himself, raised his baton. At once, all the members of the orchestra raised their instruments into position, ready to begin. With a great sweep of Ludwig's baton, the symphony began. Ludwig remembered how fine his music had sounded back in the barnyard, but it was nothing compared to the sweeping, soaring sound of a real orchestra. The audience sat spellbound at the beauty and the majesty of the music. They laughed out loud at the parts that Ludwig had written to sound like the sounds of the barnyard. Soon the symphony was coming to its crashing, dashing end. As the final note thundered out, the audience and the orchestra rose to their feet and cheered and cheered. They called out, "Bravo!" and "Hurrah!" And the conductor came out and shook Ludwig's hand and hugged him. At last, Ludwig had become Maestro Ludwig von Vegetable. The next day, Ludwig was back at the farm, happily telling his animals all about his great experience. They clucked and grunted delightedly at his story, and when he got to the part where the audience cheered, they cheered and crowed too. All of a sudden, a huge egg appeared right in the middle of the yard. A golden handle turned, a door opened, and out stepped Helga, cured.
Helga, what a beautiful egg. Thank you, Ludwig. I'm glad you like it. All that blinding light and hay was getting to me. This is so much more comfortable. Helga, I'm so glad to see you're all right, and the most wonderful thing has happened. I know all about it, Ludwig. Your concert was a great success. I've brought you the newspaper reviews. They're very good. You know, Helga, I really have to thank you. If it hadn't been for you, I never would have gone to Carnegie Hall. Even though it didn't happen quite the way I expected, you made my wish come true. The only thing I can't figure out is, how did the conductor get the music? Who could have possibly sent it to him? I did, Ludwig. After all you taught me about the instruments of the orchestra, I had to send him your symphony. And besides, I know what I like.